want to say thanks to Kristen for a wonderfully transparent story. Not every story, of course, that we do is meant to be humorous. It was very rewarding for me to hear such a story from the heart. So thanks again, Kristen. I think we should just give her a hand for being so brave. And now, Michael McRay will close us out. Tenx9, June 2014. Let's hear it for Michael.
Thank you. Once, I felt simultaneous terror and intrigue when I saw a side of someone I had never seen before. Her name is Alexa, and I knew her quite well. I knew she was sweet and kind and compassionate and gentle. I knew she had a delightful sense of humor and could be as silly as the moment called for or did not call for. I knew she was beautiful and creative and just fun to be around. And I knew Alexa, at her very core, was a deeply nonviolent, forgiving, patient, unaggressive person. Everyone who knew her loved her, and I truly never heard anyone say a negative thing about her. She rarely ever seemed to be upset with anyone. All these descriptions are important for what happens later. Well, I knew all these things about Alexa because we had been dating for 3 years at that point. I had been studying in Northern Ireland for the last 6 months, and at the end of my coursework in April, she came to visit. I met her in Dublin, having not seen her for 3 months, and after a big hug, she excitedly reached into her suitcase to pull out a Ziploc bag of homemade chocolate chip cookies, which she accidentally dumped across the floor of the Dublin airport. Our joyful reunion was interrupted with devastation and heartbreak. We bussed from Dublin to Galway, where we spent 3 days walking the western Irish coast, dining in pubs and cafes and pastry shops, and nearly getting blown off the edge of the cliffs of Moher from the hurricane-like winds. It was an Irish holiday, so it was good. We returned to Dublin for 3 days before heading to Belfast for a week. While we stayed in Dublin, we were in a youth hostel north of the river. For those who have never stayed in a youth hostel, they are fascinating places, as you often meet backpackers and eccentric travelers from all over the world. People stay up late in the commons rooms, drinking beer and telling stories to strangers who they will likely never see again. Sometimes, when you meet folks in hostels, it's an absolute privilege. And other times, you would rather the privilege have been someone else's. Such was the case for us the first night in Dublin. Traveling on nickels and dimes, we booked a room with 12 beds, 6 stacks of bunks, 3 on the south wall and 3 on the north. The plus was we would only be paying 15 euros per night. The drawback was we had no control over who also was going to stay in our room. When we entered the room, all the beds were empty. Thinking we might actually have the room to ourselves, we put our stuff on the bunk beds in the far left corner of the room, planned our day, and hit the town. When we got back that night, the bunk directly across from ours were now occupied by 2 young Frenchmen. They were quiet, polite, and thankfully uninterested in constant conversation. We were both tired, we were both tired and a bit frustrated from the day's plans not working out as we had hoped. We simply wanted to curl up on the top bunk for a bit, watch a couple of Office episodes, and then go to sleep. That part of our day worked out just as we had planned, until about 2 in the morning. The door to the hostel room swung open, and 2 large, burly men from who knows where, probably Germany, stomped drunkenly into the room. There were 8 empty beds in that dark room, but they, of course, chose the bunk that sat end to end with ours. I lay in bed, eyes wide, as I'm sure Alexa was as well, as the bunk shook from the 2 midnight stragglers hitting the sack, one tumbling awkwardly onto the bottom bunk and the other climbing clumsily onto the top. We lay there for about 30 minutes, our feet next to their heads, trying to fall back to sleep. And just as we were making the crucial turn into slumberland, the snoring began. The drunkard up top cast forth his snore with a fury. It wasn't one of those snores that begins subtle and innocent and gradually increases in depth and pitch. It started out obnoxious, and it continued that way for the next half hour. Massive snores that allowed only a 2-second respite before its cannons roared again. The 2 Frenchmen across from us got up and actually left the room to find somewhere else to sleep. I was not going to abandon ship that easily, no. At the limit of my patience, I leapt out of bed and looked at Alexa. She was sitting straight up in the bed, staring directly at the head of the guy at the top bunk. Her eyes were bloodshot with something awful. She finally looked at me as if to say, "Do something, you idiot." I began to lightly holler at the guy in the top bunk. "Hey! Hey!" Sorry for all the spit I just gave you. I even threw in a clap or two, but to no avail. I looked at her and we telepathically agreed it was time to kick it up a notch. I walked to another bed and grabbed a pillow. Standing out from the bunks, I gently tossed the pillow onto the face of the top guy. He didn't even flinch. He just kept snoring like nothing had happened. The snoring had kept us up for an hour at this point, and Alexa's face was deteriorating into an obvious state of panic. It was a look I had never seen before, and it was followed by an act I had never dreamed she was capable of. Now at the end of her rope, she crawled across her bed so that she sat directly over his face, and taking the pillow from on top of him, she began her work. She just starts hitting him in the face. I stood back in awe. What is happening? Who is this person that I've dated for 3 years who is smacking a pillow into the face of a sleeping stranger? I must admit, in those initial moments, I felt great pride and curiosity. What else did I not know about her? What else was she capable of? I soon found out. The pillow smacks did nothing to disturb the snoring. It carried on as if his proverbial snore button was stuck. Suddenly, the look in her eyes changed. There was no longer panic. There was fury. The hitting was over. She was changing tactics. Now on her knees, Alexa set the pillow down on the man's face and with a sturdy effort began pressing it down on his face as if she was giving him CPR. But on his face. Over and over, she pounded the pillow into him, verbally beseeching him, "Stop snoring, please, stop." But the man didn't budge. The snoring did not cease. She crawled back against the wall, and I cautiously got up on the top bunk to hold her in support. Then, just when we thought the night couldn't get worse, the guy on the bottom bunk joined in the chorus. Yes, they could have snored simultaneously, synchronizing their rhythm in courtesy to their fellow sleepers. They did not. Rather, they alternated snores, so that there existed in the room a constant snore, a perpetual state of snore. It sounded like a mix of 4 grown grizzlies growling and the foghorn of 2 large ships. The noise was simply unbearable. If I remember right, a tear gently slid down her cheek, as we were now realizing the war was over. Germany had won. But suddenly, after nearly 2 hours of unceasing snore, it stopped, as strangely and unexpectedly as it began. I crawled off the top bunk to return to my bed on the bottom. I don't know what I dreamed about that night or what I felt the next morning, but I do know that when I went to sleep that night, I was telling myself, for God's sake, Mike, don't snore. Thank you.